This podcast is sponsored by askROI.com.
The political side of it, and then there's the real story.
There's a lot to unpack right there. It wasn't quite the interview I thought that was going to be.
There's a reason for it.
This will be officially my favorite podcast I've ever done.
So it's not often, Frank, we get a kind of a business mogul legend. We've had a few on the podcast, but you, there's so many things that you've changed about the airline industry. And if anyone has any business acumen, they have to read this book. If they care about M&A or deals or the airline industry or finance or the art of war or all the things that you've been part of, it's just remarkable. And so I'm pretty excited that you're here, mainly because I've been a fan of you and what you've done and respect what you've done for such a long period of time. And let me get this right, because I'm pretty sure I knew this it's funny, I told my wife this morning, I said, I didn't even see the cheat sheet. I said he was the CEO of Continental, CEO of Eastern Airlines, the CEO of Texas Air. And my wife said, yeah, the very first flight I ever took was when I was 13 years old. I went to Florida on an Eastern Airline flight, back then when you got a full meal, which was great.
You're correct, except for one thing. I was never the CEO of Eastern. In fact, I never moved to Miami. We put in a CEO who moved to Miami, and he was a very capable guy that led the company through the period. I was chairman, but chairman of the board, and we had a holding company that, of course, controlled it. But that was it. But the other airlines, I used to roll up my sleeves and run those companies.
Yeah, so I recall, if you recall, in the movie Wall Street with Charlie Sheen and Michael Douglas, yes. And he quotes that quote, that I was a really young kid then, he says, it could be the hottest thing since Texas Air, which was you guys. Right. So you gotta go back to the beginning and tell us how you became an airline mogul. And by the way, we're not talking about you, like this isn't like me just saying nice words to you. This is a guy who, for the audience who doesn't know Frank Lorenzo, which means you're not in business if you don't know who this guy is, he not only sold the shuttle to Trump, but was in a bitter battle with Icahn for TWA, worked with Leon Black, who founded Apollo, who worked with Milken. You revolutionized an entire business category to something fairly biblical. And one of the things I recall, Frank, is that, and I don't know this to be true or not, but I heard when you sold the shuttle to Trump, I think it was the Eastern Shuttle. Did they call it the Eastern Shuttle at the time?
Yes.
That you were out there picking and choosing what engines went with what planes. I don't know if that's really true or not. But I was? Yeah, I was told that you were on the ground saying, we're not giving those new engines to Trump. We want these engines there. I don't know if that's true, but
that's all part of the baloney. That's nothing could be farther from the truth.
But that was a compliment, because you're out there basically, you're not let things to chance. You're running your airline. But who knows, right?
Listen, Trump was pretty hands-on too, but I doubt that he did that either.
Got it.
After he bought it. No, I never got involved. We had great operating people, and that sort of stuff was union propaganda in a way, making me out to be the guy that did everything,
Right. The unions were pretty adamant that you were kind of a union buster. I don't know whether that's really true or not.
Of course, because that's their standard line.
Right.
The fact is, we uncovered a document in a lawsuit with the unions, and it was a strategy document from their PR firm, and it had at the top, "Make Frank Lorenzo the issue." Talk about his bad management. Don't discuss airline deregulation and the pressure on costs. In other words, just stay away from the economic side. Just build up this fairy tale about Frank Lorenzo's bad management and putting too much pressure on his employees. This sort of stuff.
So how'd you decide to run an airline?
Well, from when I was a young guy, I was always interested in airlines. I've often thought, how did it start? I did come from a family that had a house in Rego Park that was right on the landing approach to LaGuardia. And I remember so well as a kid looking up and seeing the airplanes landing.
Okay, keep looking up. Okay.
And so I grew up with a great interest in airlines. But it was interesting because my interest was the business side. It was airlines. It wasn't aviation. Sure, I was interested in aviation. I learned to fly a plane. I got a pilot's license. But my real love was the business side. And in fact, after selling Continental, I started an investment firm, which was the second love that I've always had, which is the business side of what we do. And that's what I do today, as a matter of fact. But I just always had this interest in airlines. In fact, in my book, I have pictures of letters I sent TWA when I was 16, and I'm sorry, not the letters I sent, but the responses from TWA when I was 16, and then another one, 18, asking me to come in for an interview. I was constantly trying to get on with TWA. And then by chance, and this is by chance really, after Harvard Business School, I went with TWA, even though the first time I applied, I got turned down. But I insisted that they take another look at the application. They accepted me. And then I got fed up with what was going on inside the company. And then I moved on to Eastern, where I had another opportunity. And then I saw Eastern was another big bureaucracy where nobody was willing to take any risks. And that just wasn't my thing. So I left at that point and set up when we were 26 with $6,000 each to our name. I set up with Bob Carney, my classmate from Harvard Business School. The two of us set up Lorenzo Carney and Company. And that's what evolved into Jet Capital, which evolved into Texas International, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So we went from there.
Yeah, the story is iconic.
Thank you.
Yeah, I don't quite know where to go, because I could go all over the map with your book and my knowledge of your background.
Let me give you a couple of examples of some of the things that we did, Todd. Maybe this makes it a little easier. For example, when I first testified for deregulation, I was told by staff that deregulation was going to pass, even though I was in there testifying against deregulation because I knew we would get clobbered as a small company. The staff said to us afterwards, he said, Frank, you have to understand that there may be some small companies that'll fall by the wayside, that'll go out of business, but that's a small price to pay for the legislation to get this bill and to get economic regulation off these airlines and let them to be free to do what makes sense. Which, by the way, sort of theoretically to me, I liked, but I was just worried about the impact that it was going to have on our little company, particularly since we already had Southwest Airlines breathing down our neck within Texas, and now we'd have the big airlines breathing down our neck from outside of Texas. So a year later, I testified at the Senate, and I testified in favor of deregulation. Even though I knew we were going to get clobbered, it was just inevitable. And I figured that we, as relatively speaking, young men and women, had a better shot at taking advantage of a free entry environment, of a deregulatory environment, than just waiting around and fighting it and hoping that it would go away, because it wasn't going to go away. It was a trend, and so on and so forth. I have to say, one of the things we did is I flew to Washington one day, and I wanted to see the chairman of the CAB. So we got together in his conference room, and he told me he was actually a conservative guy. His name is John Robson, conservative guy, and he really liked competition and so forth. So he was frustrated with where airlines were today. He was saying, gee, I wish there was some way we could get going on deregulation without having to wait for the legislation to work its way through the sausage in the Congress. And that gave rise to our discussing an experiment that could be tried. And I saw that his face lit up really at the thought of an experiment. I went back to our troops and I said, hey, troops, here's a thought. Let's put together an experiment to see whether more people would fly if we cut the fares. That would be a very novel economic evaluation. Obviously they would, but we thought we would do that. And we did. We put together a whole plan. So 2 weeks later, my whole marketing crew comes back and makes a presentation of the whole fare structure that we were going to apply to the CAB for, which would be the first time that any carrier had asked, it would be the first time any carrier had gotten approved for a across the board low fare without restrictions, with no restrictions. So and they also gave the packaging that they were going to do to it. And the packaging was value fares. They were going to call them value fares. And I listened to this presentation, and as was my usual style, I was sort of non-committal. I just listened and thanked them very much for all their hard work and everything. And I said, let me think about it. And I thought about it, and of course, the truth of the matter is, I thought that the name of the fair was a dead bore, and I was flying a little later to Miami, and I made a stop in Minneapolis, in New Orleans, and I couldn't avoid the temptation of calling Jim O'Donnell, who was the head of marketing, and I said to Jim, "Hey Jim, listen, I'm not going to wait for that next meeting to tell you what I really think. I really think your plan is wonderful. I really like it. I really want to see us do it, but I don't like the name. We got to get something that's original, that's spicy, that's going to be memorable." So the guys go back to work, and 2 weeks later, they come back with a whole new plan. And they called it, and this was, by the way, to our officer group, and they call it peanut fares. And of course, this was also the period of time when President Carter was just being inaugurated.
Peanut
so
barber. Yeah.
It sort of rhymed. It rhymed a bit with that, but I listened. I didn't say too much. A couple of officers said, "Frank, that's terrible. In my opinion," they would say, "I think it would really cheapen the position of the company and cheapen our image and so forth." And then a couple of others said, "Well, we think it would be great. It would be memorable and all that stuff." Well, I loved it. And I told Jim and the crew, let's go. Let's put the plan together and let's file it with the CAB. And that's how peanut fares then put us on the map.
Right.
Because the CAB approved it right away. And they, as an experiment, that was their legal justification for it. And the fact is that very few of the other carriers wanted to engage in an experiment, so they stayed away from it. So we were really on our own, and that was the first time that any airline had produced a unrestricted low fare with approval of the CAB. And of course, by the way, that's how the book gets named.
Flying for Peanuts.
Thanks.
Yeah.
thanks for a daughter of mine who said, "Gee, what a great way to put the name on it."
But you guys got your operational costs like really efficient. I mean, obviously, but I'm curious as to how you got your first plane. Like you're going to start an airline. How'd you get your first plane?
Well, we didn't start an airline. What we did is we started a little company called Jet Capital, and Jet Capital had a public offering as a leasing company.
Right.
Our original concept was to be a leasing company. And we raised about $1 million, $1.5 million. We had originally hoped to raise $4 million, which is, obviously tiny, even in those days. But we weren't able to do it. Bad times came into markets, and we were only able to raise $1 million, $1.2 million. And financing got to be very, very difficult. So the thought of a leasing company with $1.2 million meant that we would be a leasing company with maybe one airplane. And that didn't exactly sound like a successful business strategy. So we thought about it and said, let's use this to go after one of the sick airlines. And we used it. We put together a deal to acquire control of Texas International Airlines, which was actually it was the most indebted and in the weakest position. It was the biggest problem child of the banks. But they were willing to work with us because the last thing they wanted was to have to put one of these things into bankruptcy. So they worked with us. We put together a refinancing plan and took it over. So it wasn't starting from scratch. The little company had 15 airplanes. And the first thing we did was turned it around. That was essential to get it profitable so that people could put a value on it and blah, blah, blah. We went from there.
Was Texas International public at the time or private?
Oh, no, it was a public company. It was public.
Right.
Stock was trading, I don't know, $3, $4.
I'm trying to remind myself of the story because you guys did buy the airline. I considered it a startup, but I guess you're being logical in the sense that you didn't start it from scratch. You bought it, but you did take.
We bought it, we built it up, we turned it into a profitable company and a successful company and a good-sized company. In fact, what we did at one point is we, again, thinking about our investment side, we looked at companies. This is after deregulation got approved. We looked at companies that would make a good fit with us to merge or whatever. And one of the first companies we looked at was National Airlines. My partner and I, Bob Carney, and I looked at the balance sheet and income statement of the company, and we said, my goodness, this is a bank, and it's selling for a fraction of what it's really worth. So we started buying the stock, and we bought up to 25% of the company. And then Pan Am got interested, and Pan Am took us out with a big profit. And that big profit ultimately is what we used to acquire Continental Airlines.
Just to set the time frame, because I know enough about this to be dangerous, but where are you when Kerkorian had a 30% stake in Western Airlines from Drinkwater, where he bought it in the open market, tendered for it? Where is that in relationship to where Texas International was?
Well, I think that was earlier, but remember that it was a different equation for those who were not an airline. Deregulation really allowed an airline to take a position in another airline. And that's really was our, I don't remember when Kerkorian got involved. I have a feeling it was in the late 70s. We took our position in National Airlines basically throughout 79, beginning in late 78. And throughout 79. We sold to Pan Am at the end of 79. So those are your years for context.
Right. Yeah. I think Western was earlier. It was a little earlier.
Maybe it was.
Right, because they had opened the routes to that Western did not have the planes with movies, and they opened the routes to Hawaii. And Western kind of was getting clobbered by the people that were out there doing that, and et cetera. Because there was obviously, there is a group of people in the airline space, including yourself, Kerkorian, and others, and Howard Hughes. So that's why I'm trying to tie this together. So what was your fascination or your relationship with Howard Hughes?
Oh, well, Hughes had always been a hero to me growing up. And you know, I also think he was very, very much misunderstood. Now, I have to say, to be fair, when I was working at TWA, I remember some of the guys telling me stories about how Hughes would commandeer some of the new airplanes, and in one case, a new Constellation, and take it down to the Bahamas and use it as a hotel, or they had to cancel flights because he wanted to experiment and see what the airplane was like. But he really didn't like the hotels there. It was what it really amounted to. But so Hughes was a strange guy, but you know, it always gave me an inspiration. And by the way, that was one of the reasons why I was always interested in TWA. And then I found myself at TWA working on a lawsuit against him. And you know, the lawsuit had some justification, but I hated the thought of working on it. And that's one of the reasons why I left TWA.
So are you talking about the time that TWA actually sued its parent, which was, I think, Toolco at the time? Is that what you're referring to?
That's right. Yeah.
And what was the premise of the lawsuit? Because I know that it ultimately got settled, did it not?
The premise of the lawsuit, yes, it did get settled. But the premise of the lawsuit was that by delaying the purchase of jet airplanes, Hughes forced the company into buying a Convair 880, which was a dead-end airplane, and it certainly was. And we didn't buy, I mean, TWA didn't buy the 707s as early as its competitors did. So it was at a big disadvantage. And that lawsuit stemmed from that, basically that equation. Was Hughes holding back on what was obviously good management should have done. He prevented the company from prospering and taking advantage of this. They even had me working on the fact that I remember this so well, that if the planes were sold later, that means the used airplanes had to be sold later, and they took greater risks, therefore, in getting the planes sold, so that that had to be factored into what Hughes cost TWA.
And why did he not want to upgrade?
You know, Hughes was a funny guy. He just had his things. He liked the Convair 880. There may be a backstory to that, and I'm not aware of what the backstory is, but he really liked the Convair 880. It was a fast airplane, heavier than hell, so it was relatively less efficient. But a lot of the passengers really liked the airplane. I remember it well.
Well, he was definitely a pioneer. There's no question about what he was doing in aviation. There's just like him and others are. So fast forward to the fact that you bought control of Texas International, you create Texas Air, you bought Continental, your holding company bought Eastern eventually. Is that correct?
Yes.
And then
that was late. That was much later in the 80s.
Right, but in the 80s, I mean, by the time, how big were you? Like, how big were you by the time that you were trying to buy TWA?
Well, that was that would be 1985. We were a smaller company, much smaller than TWA, that's for sure. But we had a critical need. We had critical needs for a computer system. We did not have a state-of-the-art computer system. We missed a lot of the physical facilities that other companies had. So we were really looking for critical mass. TWA merging with Continental made great sense. And our first approach was to do something friendly, because we really thought that it would make sense just merging the two companies, where we would provide a domestic feed structure and would have TWA's great commitment internationally. And we would do this in the context of their keeping control, because we knew we could work with their management. But then all of a sudden, Icahn moved in with a deal with the unions, and killed it. The unions basically said to him, well, the pilots said to him that, they would fly for nothing. Not for nothing, of course, but very, very low wages. And they would make this just for Icahn. So that's really how we got involved with TWA. But TWA would have made a great sense. And the other thing too, we were aviation guys, and we were very committed to saving TWA and making TWA into a successful company. We really cared about it, and we had it would have been leveraged because we didn't have that much financial resources. But after Icahn, we made money on the deal with Icahn. Probably made about another 50 million. I forget the numbers. It's a significant number.
Well, he paid up eventually, did he not?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
No. Once we bowed out of the picture, he never took out the minority shareholders. That was Carl is another story. But anyway, he paid out shareholders while he was buying the stock. But once he got us out of the picture, he was on his own, and he did not buy out the rest of the shareholders.
But in terms of getting you out, did he just buy your block from you, or did you sell it in the open market?
He bought them from us.
And he left the company public, and when he bought control?
Yes, he left the company public.
Oh, I thought it did a private transaction. I guess I didn't understand that part.
I'm trying to remember now. No, I'm pretty sure it was still public.
Mm. Well, I know ultimately it was because he went over 80% and had that pension guarantee. He got himself all twisted up in that thing. Pretty hard. Yeah.
This podcast is sponsored by askROI.com.
Icahn was is kind of a funny guy. He committed to the unions, as my book points out, that they would get equity in the company, that they would get regular equity in the company. And he gave them regular equity. But what he didn't commit to was the fact that he put his money in largely in a preferred stock that was senior to the equity that they received. So it sounded great. Oh, we're going to be shareholders of the company. Meanwhile, Icahn was going to be the preferred shareholder and able to dividend out his investment, which he did.
Yeah, I'm not going to lie. I'm familiar with that part of it. It's pretty smart.
But from that point on, we were still looking for our critical mass. And that's what attracted us to Eastern, because Eastern had tremendous amount of assets. If we could ever see this labor situation coming under control. Borman couldn't do it. Borman gave up. And we thought that the unions would come to realize that they had to make changes at Eastern to save the company. And that was just not a reasonable estimate. They just didn't care.
I know we're going out of order, but why did you sell the shuttle? Because it appeared to be like one of the best assets you guys had. What was the reasoning for selling the shuttle?
Well, it was the most severable. It was operated entirely as a separate operation. So it was one chunk of the company that was easily sold. The second reason is that, yes, psychologically, everybody thought this was Eastern's crown jewel, but in truth, it was not Eastern's crown jewel. You would look at estimates, and the estimates always had revenue going up. But what you had to look at was the number of passengers, and the number of passengers was going down. So guess what? They were getting more revenue by raising the prices. And that game, can only go so far. But the ridership was slowing down. We had built the competition, which was New York Air, which we had to sell to Pan Am. And Pan Am then picked up the competition against Eastern. And they were very effective, as was New York Air, in competing against the Eastern Shuttle. But the Eastern Shuttle had this great glamour that it was the crown jewel. And for that reason, we were reluctant to sell it because we didn't want to do something that appeared to be selling the quote unquote crown jewel, but in fact it wasn't. Like I just explained, and the other thing was that it was a lot of money. I mean, we could do 365 million, and we did it with Donald Trump in this long year negotiation with the former president.
Enter our titular character, Donald Trump, who back in the late 80s was riding on the coattails of a successful New York real estate empire. Meeting then president of Eastern Airlines, Frank Lorenzo, at a party, he managed to band together a bank deal to buy the shuttle service for himself for a cool price of $365 million. Far more than the cost of a startup of his own airline, but would automatically come with a share of the market that Eastern Airlines Shuttle dominated with Pan Am. Part of this deal was to include the entire fleet of 17 Eastern Airlines Boeing 727s, landing facilities and gates at each of the 3 cities that the carrier flew to, and the right to put his Trump brand on the aircraft and uniforms.
And I picked up the phone. I called Bob Crandall, the very well-known and hard-driving and very capable CEO of American Airlines. And I told Bob that, it was killed me, but we were going to have to sell the South American routes. Would he like to buy them? And his first question was, how much? And I said, 500 million. He said, sold.
You know, what's funny about this, Frank, is that Icahn did kind of the same thing when he sold the Heathrow routes, right? The London routes that he got approval for, and that he ended up getting the same amount of money for all 6, but he only sold 3. Is that kind of the same concept?
Well, yes, they're both sale of assets, but you have to look at the situations behind them. In Eastern's case, Eastern had no choice. It was either bankruptcy and liquidation, which ultimately it did get to, or selling off its assets to feed this cash machine that was just sucking cash, and it was sucking cash because it had a cost structure that bore no relation to the marketplace. It had a cost structure. It was very heavily a Miami, Florida airline, and guess what? A Florida airline has to be a price airline because Eastern used to have a saying that they lose a passenger for $5. So they had to be competitive with the new airlines coming in, JetBlue, People Express, of course. They were out there, and they had to cut fares. And it wasn't just the startups; it was also the big guys were competing because they didn't want to lose their share of their position in the market. So these
but the sell-off of the Latin American routes for 500 million basically put American more in that game anyways, right? So this was strategic for them one way or the other.
Well, it allowed them to create a Miami hub, which
Right.
was their goal, and which they ultimately did, and they did well.
So you're credited with basically really revolutionizing the airline industry and putting all these things together. But in your mind, like, because you've seen Buffett talk about his investment with US Air. Ironically, he talks about calling airlines anonymous, but he actually made money on the US Air investment. So I'm curious about, you were in a very tough business that's incredibly competitive. It's being deregulated. It's really still, people don't realize that even in the 70s and 80s, the airline industry was still in its infancy. It's not like it's been around for hundreds of years. It wasn't like, the country hadn't been around for hundreds of years, but it was a relatively still new business evolving with new jets and new technology and new regulation and new cost structure. What ended up happening at the end? Like, what did you end up doing with all the assets? What is today Continental, Texas Air, and Eastern? What is it today?
Oh, it's a major part of United Airlines. United bought very gladly bought Continental Airlines because we had built the Newark hub, which is a whole other story with People Express, but we built the Newark hub, and of course we built the Houston hub. And those are two of the most important hubs of United Airlines today. And I'm very proud of it. You know, the other thing was, it's kind of interesting if you look at United, and if you look at the cover of the cover of my book, you'll see that United, the third airplane, the plane on the bottom, was a paint job that we came up with, as it's described in the book, in the very end of my tenure as CEO. And as part of the deal with United, United took their name, but it took Continental's paint job. And today you'll see the remnants of that on the United airplanes, ironically. And that paint job came about because I had this view that I wanted to see Continental positioned as an international company. And Pan Am at that point was fading out of the picture. It was so clear it was going out of business. And they had been the international company with a globe. I don't know if you remember this, but
Right.
they had a globe on the tail. That's why we did that and took the globe, took a stylized globe and put it on the Continental logo. So that's where it is today.
When did you know, like, though, when you were doing it, like when you first bought Texas International, like, was it, you know, I asked myself the same question for myself, which is I've sort of failed forward, where we, you know, thought, okay, we got $1 million, then we got 5 million, then we got 50 million, then we got 100 million, then we got 200 million. But along the way, there were all these sort of failures that happened, but they were failures forward, meaning you still kept going, but you made mistakes. Like, when did you think that you guys had made it as an operator? Where was it the Continental purchase? Was it the where you were going aggressively to try TWA? Where did you feel like you had made it in terms of success? Because you guys obviously started with nothing, $6,000 a piece, which to me is the real story here. All the stuff in between, to me, is irrelevant. It's part of the journey you were on to build your business and to change an industry, but you had to start from nothing, right? And you had to evolve your ideas.
Yeah.
When did you feel like that you had made it, or were you constantly trying to you know, get to the next meal, knowing you just had to get bigger and bigger? Because you even said it in this conversation, and I'll point it out to you. It's a philosophy. You started off with $1 million. You started with $6,000 each. You got $1 million. You did Texas Air. You did Continental. You sold just the Latin routes for $500 million. So there's a point in time where you had to say to yourself, wow, this is really, you know, I've really done some amazing things here. When did you feel that it was amazing to you?
Well, this is going to sound funny to you, but in many ways, I've often thought about that exact question. Excuse me. And I've come to the conclusion that the most important deal that we ever did was a deal where no money from us was involved. We put together, as when we were 27, the acquisition of Zantop Air Transport by some entrepreneurs from Brooklyn, and they took it over, and we were paid a finder's fee for putting the deal together. But that fee put Lorenzo Carney on the map. It enabled us to go forward and do a lot of other stuff, including ultimately set up Jet Capital, which we did with some good friends who invested $25,000, $50,000 into the venture. So we raised $250,000, and we filed for Jet Capital. We filed with in fact, people always laughed. It was an 8-page prospectus, because the only thing we showed was a balance sheet with $250,000 and plans to become a leasing company. It was all just in the future, and then of course we ultimately didn't do that. But you know, these were all deals there were sort of steps. It was like a ladder. I mean, we just went slowly up the ladder. Obviously, the national deal was a huge deal for us because we made what was a 45 million profit. You have to remember that we were a little airline that had a net worth of $12 million when 1978 began. And by the time 1979 rolled around, we had made 45 million. We went from a net worth of 12 million to a profit on just this one transaction of 45 million.
Wow.
So, it's hard to say which one we were always holding our breath. And then, of course, we rolled the dice with Continental because Continental was a big thing to chew off. And we did.
How'd you buy Continental?
We tendered for it. We started buying the stock in the market. And I should say, by the way, even before that, we tried to do a friendly deal. We wanted to do a friendly merger. We were not in the business of increasing our risk. I flew out twice to see Bob Six, the then chairman, at his home in Beverly Hills, but I couldn't get to first base. I mean, we made great sense for a merger with Continental. But back in those days, he was very close to the guys at Western Airlines. They were very chummy, and Continental wanted to merge with Western. In fact, in many ways, what gave us the opportunity to take over Continental was they announced a merger with Western. And the street hated it so much that it killed the stock. And that's what we really went in there buying it after we had been turned down by Continental on a friendly basis. In fact, when we tendered for Continental, we tendered with the hope that we would get a majority of the proxies from the votes. The only way we would buy the stock in the tender is if you turned over your voting rights, which we did, and we killed the Western merger, which the street, as I said, hated. It made no sense. It was just two neighbors on the street doing a friendly deal, the way they used to do it in the old days. But deregulation was a new game, and ultimately Western was picked up by Delta.
Where'd you get the financing for the Continental deal?
Well, that's a good story. We tendered for it, and 50 million of the tender we said was subject to financing. But as you know, as somebody from Wall Street, subject to financing is something that is not well received. And when you're trying to get
not well received.
You're trying to give, but it told where we were going. And that afternoon, that was a Monday, and that afternoon we flew to New York from Houston and visited with the then McGillicuddy, the then CEO of Manny. And we had what was called a face meeting, where he just wanted to meet us. And then by the time we got back to our offices, he had approved the 50 million loan. So that gave us the financing we needed to get the deal done.
When he gave you the money for the tender, and I kind of already knew that answer, by the way, sorry, but I've studied pretty much everything you've ever done. I don't remember it all perfectly, but when he gave you the financing at Manufacturers Hanover, was that tender for all the stock or just majority control?
We tendered for 50%. We weren't sure that this had never been done before. We were breaking totally new ground, and we didn't know what the CAB was going to allow. No airline had ever tendered for another airline. And by the way, that's still the case today. So that's why we did 50%, because we knew if we had 50%, we had the company.
And Manufacturers Hanover was okay to say, hey, we're going to finance this at conclusion as long as you get 50%? Did they actually have a limitation that you had to get that 50% before they would finance it?
I don't remember the terms of it. I don't remember the terms of it, Todd. I suspect so, but it was an all or nothing tender anyway. Mm-hmm. Because I think it was more a question of getting enough votes to kill the Western merger, which is what we did.
And did you? Well, okay. Well, I mean, to me, I'm fascinated by the financing part of it because you're lining up 50 million to buy an airline. To buy half of it, you're going to a bank to get it. I mean, this is really sort of cutting edge stuff that had not been done before. And
yeah, it was very, it was what, like I said, it was what's called a face loan.
Where do you call home now?
Texas. Oh, we're very much Texans. And,
I used to own
I
used to own a big chunk of a company down there. I bought a public stake in a company we sold to private equity called Taco Cabana. And I'm very familiar with Texas. I love it down there. I actually own a crane business down there in Corpus Christi. So what are you doing today nowadays? I know you have an asset management firm. Are you actively involved there? Is it your firm, or what do you do there on a daily basis?
No, I don't go into the firm on a day-to-day basis. I'm blessed by having a very capable investment manager, and he and I are in touch all the time. And he has an office, well, we have an office in New York, and occasionally I go into that office and I come to New York City. But we also have an office in Houston. I used to have it manned, and today we don't man it. But we love our time in Houston, and we have a lot of friends in Houston, and we have a nice place there. So our newest car is in Houston.
And the reason I asked that about what you're doing now is because I'm curious. I mean, I'm a student of history, especially a student of financial history, and I don't think 47 minutes. I mean, we didn't even get into one fraction of what I want to get into. Like, this does not. Your status as a financial professional, a manager, a builder of companies, what you've done is sort of understated. I'm curious what you're trying to accomplish with the book, because
get our story out. We're trying to get our story out, and that was always, the book is 25 years in the making.
Sure.
And I was really anxious to get our story out, and people were telling me that it's a really attractive story for entrepreneurs.
It's a great story. It's not an attractive story. It's a great story. And when my producer told me that I got a chance to put you on my show, I about flipped out. I said, you don't understand that this guy is a living fucking legend. This guy, where is he at right now? I mean, so are you teaching right now? Are you lecturing? Or is it just the book? What are you doing? Because in that mind of yours, you don't even remember how you got the 50 million from Manufacturers Hanover. The stuff you did is legend making. And I don't think I'm exaggerating. I'm aware of your relationship with Leon Black and the stuff you did. It's really iconic stuff. I'm curious as to is this the only way you're getting the message out?
Well, listen, getting the book done was a major project.
Sure.
It's taken a major part of my time.
Sure.
And it's still taking a huge amount of my time. I'm giving several book talks starting, in fact, this Wednesday. And so that's a big part of my time commitments. But there's a number of other things. I'm very involved in some charitable organizations, the most prominent of which is the Hispanic Society of America, where I have been a trustee for 20 years. It's a wonderful organization. It is the largest collection of Spanish and Latin art outside of Spain. My wife and I are in Spain all the time. In fact, we were just there a couple of weeks ago. We love to go there. But now it's going to be, and by the way, all through this period, I was paying a lot of attention and still do pay a lot of attention to what's going on in the markets. I have a screen right now that I'm looking at to tell me just what the market is doing and all the different names on the screen. But I have to say that my screen is not one from the very fancy suppliers like Bloomberg. Those are, although we do have a fancy one in our office. Mine is from Interactive Brokers, Tom Petterfy's wonderful company.
Yeah, he's built a big business.
Yeah, huge business, and he has a great product.
What would you do in the airline industry today if you could do it again? Like, what do you think the landscape like? You're down to a couple big carriers. You got some regional stuff, but like what do you think is interesting about the carriers today?
Well, if you believe, as I do, that the Fed has a lot up its sleeve to keep the economy going, and that we're going to have a soft landing or no landing. If you believe that, given the fact that we're also seeing a drop of fuel prices, which I also see, maybe not a lot more than now, but if we see oil staying in the 50 to 60 to 70 range, airlines will continue to do very, very well. They're very sensitive to fuel price. And the airlines are so cheap. I mean, United Airlines, which is one of our favorites, is, sells really at about 4.5 times earnings. And we just think they're great investments right now.
I got 2 more questions for you because we both got to go. I got to go do something, but I'd prefer to stay here and talk to you. But I'm curious if you're still friends with Donald Trump.
No, I respect the hell out of him, but I have not. In fact, I have to figure a way to get the book to him. We haven't even gotten the book to him yet. He actually, if you ever read it, he actually spoke very highly of our time together.
Oh, I read it.
Yeah, kind of interesting. But no, I'm not friends with him today.
Well, I'm going to see him in a couple weeks. I'll be at Mar-a-Lago. I'll tell him that he's got to get your book. You said he's got to get your book, but I'm sure your publicist has a way of getting it to him.
Well, we haven't been successful so far, but to tell you the truth, we haven't really focused on it too much because he's pretty busy with things that he's right on.
I wanted to ask your opinion on something that I thought it was kind of nonchalant that Southwest did it, but your thoughts on them deciding that they're not going to have the cattle car anymore and they're going to go to assigned seating?
Well, I don't like to comment on strategy of other companies. Everything is so unique. Obviously, they were very pressured by the activists that have come in and wanted to meet what they wanted. I have said I do believe that strategy has been successful with many other carriers. I look at how United has divided their cabin very nicely between business, between premium economy, and then straight economy, so the people can decide what they want in terms of seat pitch, food service, and be willing to pay for it. If they want the super cheap fare, it's there. If they want to pay a little more and get premium and so forth. So that's a strategy that makes great sense.
I haven't. I said I had one more question, but I got to get another one in because I don't know when the next time I'm going to be able to talk to you is. But what do you think of Emirates? I will tell you, I flew it to Dubai, and I thought to myself, airlines have really changed over the time that I was in 5th grade and flew Delta to Cincinnati to Cleveland, and I got the Eggs Benedict, and I thought I was the luckiest kid in the world. To me, the best Eggs Benedict I ever had was on a Delta flight, which is insane because the food used to be so good. But I took a flight from Emirates to Dubai, and I wondered if you had a chance to be on one of those airlines.
Yes, I did. I flew on Emirates. One time my wife and I were flying from Bangkok to Hong Kong, and I noticed that there was an Emirates flight on an A380 that was coming through, and so I booked 2 first-class seats.
Oh boy!
For the simple reason that I wanted to see what their first class was like, but also to try their A380, which itself is like a flying house.
Right.
But while I was on board the airplane, my wife and I had a glass of wine, and I took a picture of the wine that we were served. And when I got off the airplane, I priced that bottle, and it was $125. I mean, they just spared. It seemed like in first class, they spared no expense.
It's crazy. It's crazy. I bet I would have loved to have been next to you when you were thinking about flying for peanuts and what if you would ever imagine that Emirates Airlines would existed when you started this concept of flying for peanuts. Frank Lorenzo, I will promise you, everyone watching this, I have read about Frank most of my adult life. Even when I was a kid, I followed him in the 80s when I was in high school. I hope I get to meet you someday. I was so fascinated to hear that you wrote this book, and I will read every page of it. When's the audio version come out?
October 27th.
Rest assured, I will do a review. I'm pretty excited for you. Congratulations on writing the book, Frank.
Thank you. Thank you.
Frank,
Come
if
on
you-
down to Houston. Love to say hello.
Frank, if you ever get to Vegas, I'd love to meet you in person. I'd love to take you to dinner if you ever could spare the time. I know that you probably can't, but if you did, you could. I would. I'd love it. I think you're a fighter, and it's remarkable you're doing this book now after all these years. I bet there's a ton of people that are going to read it because you've interacted with so many people, so much of your industry, and whether it be banking or I mean, hopefully the next president of the United States. I mean, you really have tossed it up with everybody. You're a living legend, my friend, and I appreciate you being here.
Thank you.
Take care, Frank. Hi, everybody. It's Todd Ault, and you're invited to the entertainment capital of the world, Las Vegas, for the 3rd annual RiskOn360 Global Success Conference. Now, over the years, we've had Tucker Carlson, RFK Jr., Alex Rodriguez, Damon John, Charles Payne, and the legendary sports agent Lee Steinberg. You know, the story about him was he was the guy in Jerry Maguire. It's just an amazing guy. We've had an amazing audience of people and speakers. If you're an entrepreneur, this is a must-attend event. I don't think there's any conference where you get to meet people in all walks of life that are really doing business and meet the speakers. You got to be there. You got to look at the feedback. It's just been amazing. Join me during the exciting F1 weekend. It's November 24th, 25th, and 26th at the Rio Hotel and Casino in Las Vegas. The thing's been redone. It's Las Vegas, man, and it's a brand new casino. They've redone the whole thing. To secure your seats, go to riskon360.com. That's riskon360.com. Want free gifts and exclusive invites? Text RSVP to 31798. That's RSVP to 31798. And don't forget to subscribe to my podcast. Follow me on Instagram. Click the link in my bio and risk on, everybody.
This podcast is sponsored by askROI.com.
You know, I'm going to explain to you real quick. But don't be rolling yet. There's a reason for it.
So I did get that right. I did get that right.